That's it. I would love to welcome Nicky Lowe. She is an accredited executive coach, a podcast host, and founder of Wisdom for Working Mums. And she's very kindly agreed to join me for the Infinite Stressless Leadership Expert interview series. And I'm really excited to chat with Nicky. So I'm Louise Hallam, and I work with awakening empaths to eliminate stress and fatigue so they can rediscover the joy in their life and leadership. And I'm also an intuitive and spiritual mentor, but I'm really interested to find out more about Nicky today. So hello, Nicky.
Hi.
Thank you once again for joining me, and please do introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit more about you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And as you said, yeah, I, for the past 16 years, have run my own business working as an executive coach, going into mainly large corporate organizations around the world, working predominantly one-to-one with people to help them navigate organizational life, really, so that they can thrive personally and professionally. And over that journey have kind of come to specialize really in working with female leaders, and that's led me to do actually quite a lot of maternity coaching, because some women, that's part of their journey.
Yeah.
And so 3 years ago I set up Wisdom for Working Mums, because I could see some specific challenges that women were having in the workplace when they found that their careers and motherhood collided. And so now I have a kind of passion project for supporting working mums.
Fantastic. And just tell me a little bit about maybe your journey. So what led you to really setting up that business? What was the idea behind it in terms of how your own journey went?
It probably starts really over 16 years ago now, if you join the dots back. So I started my career working in the IT industry and found myself getting promoted at a young age into quite a senior position, where I was managing global teams, selling high-end computer systems, and it was a fantastic position to be in. But I spent a lot of that part of my career kind of looking over my shoulder with imposter syndrome, going, somebody's going to find out I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. So I was kind of working stronger, harder, faster than most people to prove more to myself than anybody that I was worthy of the position I was in and the big package that was being paid. And so back then I was burning out and probably didn't have the language for it then, but I just had this experience of this is not sustainable. And I ended up going on a training course with work, which was about managing cross-cultural teams, because I'd got teams across Europe in different kind of languages and cultures. And I went on a training course and they did about an hour on coaching. And I remember sitting in this training course going, I kind of do this. And what I come to realize was that my natural leadership style had been coaching, because I was leading people that were often twice my age, twice my experience. I couldn't tell them what to do. What I developed was this natural coaching style as my leadership. And it really set me off and going, I want to learn more about this. And I kind of fell in love with coaching. And I actually went and got my own executive coach. And that was a really powerful experience. And that was kind of nearly 17 years ago. And it led to the situation where I realized that I wanted to become a coach. But it took a bereavement. I was on holiday. I was on this fabulous holiday, sat in the Maldives, because I was burning out. I was like, I need a really nice holiday to replenish. And I was a week into a 2-week holiday in kind of paradise. And I got a call to say that my mum had died really suddenly, really unexpectedly. And I had 24 hours before I could get a flight home. So I was sat in absolute paradise. And I remember just sitting on the beach, kind of going, what is it all about? What is life about? And so I had this really existential moment of, I can't continue working as I'm working. And it was almost like my world shifted on its axes in those 24 hours. And by the time I flew home, I knew that I wanted to hand my notice in and I wanted to kind of retrain. So I took a year out, retrained as an exec coach, and launched my business 16 years ago.
Wow.
So that was kind of an early stage burnout journey where I didn't actually reach burnout. But then fast forward another 8 years, and I was in a position where my business was thriving. I had just got married. We'd renovated a farmhouse. I was kind of in a position where I thought, God, life can't get much better than this. And we decided we wanted to start a family. And I was lucky enough to have a beautiful baby boy. And 12 months into motherhood, I found myself burning out. And I actually finally, after 12 months of feeling horrendous and just being told I was a new mum and new mums are tired, I got diagnosed with adrenal fatigue. So I had literally burnt my stress system out. And my recovery journey was a really powerful one. So I call it my breakdown to breakthrough moment, really, that I went on quite an interesting journey to discover why had this happened, because actually as a coach, I had the tools and resources where theoretically that shouldn't have happened. And I came to discover a lot about kind of motherhood and women in the workplace, and when those two kind of systems collide, what can happen. And that's where the passion project for Wisdom for Working Mums was born from, because all of the information I learned on that, I was like, more women need to know this, to make sure kind of people don't go through that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that so many people who will watch this will resonate with that. And I think, as you say, there's often a very poignant moment where you can feel like the life, the rug's literally been pulled from underneath you, but it's at that point that maybe you have that pivotal moment in your life. And it's interesting you said the breakdown to breakthrough, because that's also often something that happens where people, it's then the catalyst, isn't it, for change. So actually it becomes the blessing really behind what you then go on to do. So I thank you for that real honest account of that, because I know that sometimes when you're in the middle of that bit, it can feel like you can't, you're never going to get out of it. And I think also what's resonated is that your own experience has then gone on to help other people, and that's where you use that to really find the purpose behind you going through that, and you can reflect on it in a different way. So I think that's really powerful message for people who, I think especially at the moment, are going through lots of change and experiencing those downfalls, which they think, you think, why is it happening to me, what have I done, sort of thing. And particularly when it's as well, with the physical impact of that, which takes time to recover from, and you have to be very kind to yourself during that process. So that's amazing to reflect on that. And so I know when we initially spoke, we talked about this concept of what got you here won't get you there, and it really resonated with me, because I thought, yeah, that's true. You're not the same person that you were 20 years ago, whether that's motherhood or I think you mentioned, like a bereavement. I think that really can change your outlook on life and career. So tell me a little bit more about this concept, and how did you come across it?
Well, I'd used it a lot in my kind of work over the last nearly 2 decades, really. And a lot of it would be put around, I would do a lot of leadership development with people, and particularly I would work on emerging leader programs where you'd got people that were seen as the talent of the future in an organization, and they were given development programs and a coach to work with to help them really accelerate that development. And part of it is looking at, if we look at it technically from a kind of organizational perspective, and then I'll relate it personally to how kind of that then impacted my own journey. So from a technical perspective, what we would say in terms of leadership is there are some common steps that a leader will go on in their leadership journey, and it's called the leadership pipeline. So effectively, most people start their career as an individual contributor. So, they're responsible for their own work, and they are kind of performance managed around that. So that's the starting point. And if you're good as an individual contributor, you then might get promoted to be a manager. And if you're good at that, you might be promoted to become a manager of managers. And then if you're good at that, you might be promoted to be a functional leader. So you might head up, I don't know, HR or finance. And then if you're good at that, you might be promoted to be an enterprise leader, so CEO type of role. And through that leadership pipeline, there are critical points of transition where you have to stop doing some stuff and pick up doing some other stuff. And what can happen is we can get stuck at those transition points. So, for example, an individual contributor, the common challenge is that when you become a manager, you need to start managing people. So you might need to do holiday forms and performance management, all that kind of stuff. But you also need to let go of doing it all yourself and need to learn how to delegate. And for a lot of people, they struggle with that because their sense of self-worth comes from doing it all. So those are like the common transition points. So the what got you here won't get you there was always a description I would use to say, you know, it might have been what's got you to this level in your career, but what's going to get you to the next level is often different. And we need to learn new skills, new capabilities. And it's almost like a vertical development opportunity. And that's where coaching and training courses come into it. So that would be the kind of philosophy behind it. And there was a really famous book written by a guy called Marshall Goldsmith, who is an American guy who's kind of a CEO coach. So he's coached the CEOs of Ford and like big major corporate organizations. And he talks about that in terms of his work as well. So it's been something that I've been familiar with and used within my kind of client coaching and leadership development for years. And I think what happened when I had my burnout journey, when I became a mum, is, as I say, I went on this big discovery journey of how has this happened? What has led to this? You know, I got really ferociously curious about it because I was like, I don't understand why this has happened. And I started to realize that the strategies that had supported me to the point in my life, particularly in my career, weren't the strategies that were going to help me in this next stage of my life. So when I added motherhood into the mix, I needed to, it was a vertical development opportunity, really. Everything shifted, but I didn't approach it in that way. So I didn't look at, well, what are the skills? And, you know, because you're in it, you're just kind of getting on with it. You're in survival mode, really.
Yeah.
And so it made me realize that a lot of the strategies that had made me successful in my life weren't strategies that were going to help me at this next stage, partly because they weren't sustainable when I added motherhood into the mix. So, for example, both me and my husband run our own businesses, and we used to be, I would say, quite classic workaholics. So we would work, but then we would build in very conscious replenishment time. So we actually had this strategy before children. We knew that every 12 weeks we needed a holiday. So we would have a week's holiday every 12 weeks. So we would work for 12 weeks and then just lie in kind of the sunshine and replenish, which actually was worked for us, but actually it was a coping strategy for probably unhealthy working patterns.
Right.
But it worked, and so it sustained us. Then when you bring in children into that whole mix, obviously you can't work as hard, but we were still using the same kind of methodology. And prior to my son starting school, obviously we could take regular holidays, not having to worry about school terms. And so we still kept up with that kind of cycle. But of course, holidays with children aren't actually holidays. They're just making memories. Yeah, we talk about, you know, there's the same kind of motherhood load, but you're just in a different location, and actually often it's more uncertain and more chaotic. So what I quickly realized is, oh, actually that strategy is not working. My form of replenishment that I once used is no longer the form of replenishment that's going to work for me now. And that's just a small example of actually the kind of strategy.
But I can imagine that people will have that real light bulb moment where you think actually what you try to do is just cope with more, so as though you were taking on like an extra project. But it's a different, you know, kind of project, and maybe, you know, especially people who think very logically, you just try and break it down like that and go, right, I'm going to add it to the workload and it becomes part of something that I just manage. Whereas I think what maybe you're saying is you almost need to unpick everything that you've done and the strategies that you've had, and really sort of start from a different place.
Absolutely. And it's very much breaking it down. So what I realized was that I'd got a lot of rules. A lot of them were unconscious about what it meant to be a good mother, a good wife, a good businesswoman. And a lot of those rules were either outdated, unhealthy, or too rigid. And they were based a lot around kind of putting conditions on my worth. You know, I was only a good businesswoman if I was sat at my desk, you know, working a 9 to 5 every day. And it's like, actually, who says that? Where's that rule come from? I can run a successful business and do it differently. So it was going back to the drawing board and looking at how I'd built my foundation for success, and actually, was that a healthy and sustainable foundation?
Yeah.
And if it wasn't, could I replace it with a more helpful rule, or could I hold that rule less rigidly?
Yeah, so from your own experience then, what are kind of the tips that you would give to people, whether it's like through having motherhood and having children and managing that kind of leadership career, wherever stage they may be at, or whether it's a different, it could be a different kind of change. What would be your tips then on how you might go about approaching that once you've got that realization?
Well, I think I can give you the bigger picture and then break it down to a really simple step, because
Perfect.
all of this can sound great, but sometimes if we're so busy and we're feeling so overwhelmed, it's like, I haven't even got the time to think. So that's all great in theory. So I'll give you the theory, but then give you something that's like a stepping stone. Brilliant. That feels more easy to do it. So a lot of this is about, as we've talked about, the awareness and having that reflection to go, what is important to me? What are my values? What's my definition of success? And going back to the drawing board, because what can happen is we end up kind of swallowing other people's rules and expectations and societies. So we end up living a life that we're like, I have no idea how I found myself here. I'm kind of living somebody's definition of success, but it doesn't feel like mine anymore. Yeah. It feels soulless. I'm, physically, I feel depleted, all of those kind of things. So the theory would be you would go back to the drawing board, and this is what I would do with my clients in coaching, is actually, what does make you happy? What if you could have a blank piece of paper and create your ideal life, what would that look like? And how do you start to take your personal power back to make that happen? So those would be the steps, taking that reflection and starting that journey. But as I say, in our busy lives, that just might feel like a luxury. So a starting point that I would work with any client on is start to do what I would call trigger tracking. If you're feeling that you're experiencing a lot of unhelpful emotions, and helpful is probably not the right term, because all emotions are helpful because they're just chemically encoded data that are telling you something. But if you find yourself experiencing a lot of, again, negative, and again, I don't like that word because actually it could a unhelpful or negative emotion like anger or resentment or anxiety, frustration, they actually can be quite positive if we listen to them. But if those kind of quality of emotions that feel difficult, if you can use those to start what I would call trigger tracking. So if you're feeling frustrated today, it's just ask yourself the simple question, what's that about? What actually is sitting underneath there? Because there's a message in there for you. And the more you can start listening to those messages, the more data it's going to give you to start to make some positive changes. So for me, a lot of what led to my journey of burnout was I wasn't listening to the messages. I was almost making myself wrong for having these emotions, like I should be happy because I've got this wonderful life, I've got a child and all the things that I'd hoped for, yet I feel crap, and I wasn't listening to what is behind that. And when I started to, it was recognizing that I'd got needs that I wasn't admitting to. I wasn't giving myself permission. And once we can start to listen to those, it might be actually, I just need some quiet time. I am more introvert than I ever knew, but I live in quite an extrovert world. And so actually recognizing I just need half an hour sitting on my own, and that's okay. Because if we don't honor those needs, they start to bubble away as the frustration, the resentment, and then we find ourselves reacting. We might lose our temper, or we might be passive aggressive, rather than giving a voice to it and going, actually, I need to do some things to feel okay and feel topped up enough in my emotional and energetic and physical bank account that I can kind of do what I want in my life. And so that would be the simple start, is start to track your kind of emotions and what are the triggers that are leading to that.
Yeah.
And just that awareness on its own will start to give you data.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think like you say, you can sort of say, right, you can make all of these changes, but actually it can feel like a huge step to actually make those changes. So that just feels like a real practical thing that you can do, which is not too daunting in terms of tackling all of those things. And I'm a big advocate for, as you say, expressing those energies and those emotions, because they are there to help you.
Yeah.
They're there to tell you what's going on. And I think sometimes you can at least get rid of some of that surface emotion, which is the stuff that is probably taking you down each day.
Yeah.
And once you've kind of got behind that, you can then start to look at the bigger picture. So I don't know if you agree, but it's probably like, it's tiny steps, isn't it? Just start with what you can manage, and then, you know, don't just think you're gonna have to make some big life changes.
But you've got to feel resourced enough to do that, and most of us are operating outside of our resilience zone, and when we do that, we're in survival mode. So we need to do the trigger track and go, what's kind of one thing that would bring me back into my resilience zone, and then we feel more resourced to go on that journey. So
perfect. Well, that's just been really insightful. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, maybe specifically for working mums, or
Yeah, I think there's a context about really how we've all been operating in the last 18 months, 2 years with COVID, whether we're mothers or not. That, you know, the whole of the pandemic has really tested us even further. And particularly if we're working mums, you know, the statistics now about how many women are feeling burnt out, how many women are considering leaving the workforce completely because they, you know, they can't find a sustainable way to work, is shocking and also deeply upsetting, because we're at I think a critical point for women in the workplace. So for people to know they're not alone if they're feeling that way, and literally just doing one small thing a day that can help you get back to a place where you feel more able to cope with it all, is so critical. And as I talked about, getting back into that resilience zone, because I think what I'm seeing in a lot of my clients is they're operating out of it. They're either in, if you imagine a resilience zone that we kind of wave between, and we're meant to, you know, we have stressful moments and then we go back down. A lot of us are either in hyper arousal, where we're kind of so charged up in our fight and flight, or we've dropped to the bottom of hyper arousal and we're just kind of like, we're so depleted, we can't kind of get the motivation to do anything. That bringing ourselves back into that resilience zone, particularly after the last 18 months to 2 years, is so critical. And that's about self-compassion, to go,
definitely. And I think this is a real time for people to reset. I think people have gone through an awful lot, and actually this opportunity to reset, what are your priorities, and as you say, a lot of the priorities around you as an individual right now, and then go from there. You know, really nourish yourself and nurture yourself, and do whatever it takes right now to, like you say, replenish yourself.
And knowing that if you're outside of that resilience zone, just the thought of replenishing can feel almost impossible. And I've been there, and I know it's kind of like, I know I should be doing self-care, but I don't have 2 minutes, because often we're in survival mode, and our threat and protection system is so geared up. It's like, I haven't got the ability to do that. And it can literally just be you putting your hand on your heart and going, God, this is tough right now. And just that small action in itself, you know, you don't have to go and take 10 minutes meditation or whatever. It's literally just putting your hand on your heart and going, oh gosh, today's a difficult day. It's just acknowledging yourself and your need, and that it's tough. And there's a lot of science behind that I could absolutely bore you with, and I won't. But it's just taking those little steps and acknowledging yourself,
not feeling overwhelmed by the actual making yourself feel better, isn't it? I found that so interesting. I know there's so much more that you could tell us, Nicky. So if people want to know more about working with you and resources, where can they find that information? What can they do?
the best place to head is over to my website, which is wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk. So wisdom for FOR mums, MUMS.co.uk. Get on my email list. You'll get all of the details of, I do a podcast, I do free workshops, you can get all the resources there. I do a blog, and you'll find out how you can kind of work with me there as well. But that's the best place to head. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. But yeah, the website's the best starting point.
Thank you. I'm sure many people will be interested to find out more. So I just want to say it's been an absolute joy to connect with you today, Nicky. Thank you so much for your time and valuable insights. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Louise, for inviting me.